Welcome to another episode of Practical Steiner with your host, me, Ronda. This is a podcast wherein I hold very loosely the general question, what might Rudolf Steiner say about this or that subject? Whatever subject's of interest to me. I'm a fairly new Steiner student, just the last almost 4 years. And I got a lot of questions. So I like to talk to other people who have been studying Steiner at least as long as I have and, just ruminate on things. So today I'm delighted to be sitting with multiple Practical Steiner contributor, Brooke. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Rhonda. Thanks for having us here again.
I'm so delighted. And now here we have Angus, who is a new acquaintance of mine. Hello, Angus.
Hi, Ronda. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yes, we are looking at one another, but on the Practical Steiner, we might just be audio friends. But so Angus, you were there in Sweden, and I just wanted to start Practical Steiner today by saying, who are you, Angus? Why do we know you, and how do we get this pleasure of being able to speak to you in a podcast?
Basically, I listened to a recording by you and Brooke, and then there was a follow-up conversation which I found interesting, and I found out that Brooke and I share a love of languages. I am definitely a linguophile, a language nerd, I call myself, and language. This is how we do this whole thing. Imagine life without language. How are you going to share ideas? And to meet people who are particularly interested in language, it results in interesting, stimulating conversations. So that was how come we got started. And then you know yourself, once a conversation gets going with a good conversation partner, it just keeps building. It keeps building new, interesting questions, sharing insights with one another. It becomes that joyful process of sharing and growing together. That's how come I'm sitting here today, I guess.
Beautiful. And may I ask, are you English or are you Swedish?
No, I'm English. Born and bred in the UK. Lived in Germany for 3 years, which means to speak German. And then I moved back to the UK to go to university, but I've been living in Sweden for the last 23, 24 years.
Okay. And so you speak German to the point also of reading it, and you could read in the original, the Steiner stuff in the original?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I find that especially important with philosophical works. It's incredibly important. Less so with what we're going to be talking about today, because the technical anthroposophical terms that he uses here, so that they work as well in English. But So this one, in actual fact, I've skim read this, but one of my preferred ways of consuming Steiner is there's some of the listeners might know this. Dale Brunswald got his own website called rudolfsteineraudio.com or rudolfsteiner.com .com, sorry. And there are about 200 or so lecture series that he's recorded over the years. So when I'm sitting in the car, before speaking to you guys, I was sitting out in the conservatory with a cup of tea, listening to one of these lectures, because it's familiar stuff, but it's like a good song. It's like poetry. You listen to it time and time again, and something can grow in you in a different way.
Nicely put. Now, let me get this straight. The conservatory is where the music is played or where the plants are?
It's just a glass room. It's not a musical conservatory. Yeah, it's where the plants are, and I guess I'm a plant as well then.
I was wondered when we were playing the game Clue, and Mrs. Mustard did the thing with the candlestick and the conservatory. I'm just like, where is she? I don't know about this room. All right. Anyway, so today we three are going to be talking about. We are using as a starting point lecture 1 of GA 234. Yes, are we doing that all?
Mm.
Okay, now I didn't take the moment to title this lecture. Does anybody have that handy?
I have a copy that was printed from RS Archive, and the title of the lecture in English was Anthroposophy is What Men Long for Today. And what's interesting about this lecture, it's a 1924 lecture. So it's January 19th of 1924, meaning that was the last year that Steiner was giving lectures.
Yes. And last time we were talking together, not on a podcast, we I think, Angus, you mentioned the theme of this lecture about how anthroposophy is something that people long for, the knowledge that can come through it in their hearts, and that you were articulating, like, how can we participate in helping give that information. Would you say that was fair, that you were talking?
Yes, and what a complicated question it is. Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
And then I piped up, because I am the one that will always hold down the contrarian bad attitude. Like, well, wait a minute. Are people asking for this knowledge? Like, are we proselytizing? Do we just want to go, hey, y'all need this knowledge, just hush up and let me give it to you? So the question I wanted to start out with today is, how is it not that? How can we start from a good, kind of pure place?
That's a great question.
Oh,
yeah.
good.
One of the things that I've always felt about my interest in Steiner's work is I don't want to share it with other people unless they ask. And part of that, of course, is inspired by this general story about Steiner, which is he couldn't share his knowledge with other people until someone had asked some questions. And so there's that attitude of respecting the freedom of the other human being all the way through Steiner's work and anthroposophy.
Amen.
Yeah.
Which, to me, for myself, explains why is it that it even works on me.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just something so strong in me that's just like, I did not ask you that. I did not ask you
Yeah.
to tell me these things. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's just like, it's so repellent that I can't even listen, whatever kind of good idea you have.
And sometimes people have that experience because they grew up, in a religious situation that felt a little stifling. But I don't recall you saying that about your childhood.
No, I really can't explain it. My mother was the opposite
Yeah.
of that. She had a strong faith, and we grew up in it. But 6 out of the 7 children did not take it up.
Mm.
And I don't recall one moment of my entire life where my mother said anything like, you really could maybe benefit from, I don't know, attending church again. So I can't explain it. It's probably somewhere in the psychologicals of something. But anyway, moving on. What do you think, Angus?
I think there are so many different ways of asking that really rich question. An experience from yesterday. I'll give the title first, and then a direct experience, which I think could lead us deeper into the conversation. So, people who are capable of feeling their thinking respond to these ideas. There is an emotional response to the wholeness, to the well-being that it creates in me when I live that thought. So it's experiential. And one of the things that is so fascinating, and we've probably all had these conversations, I certainly have, where you're trying to communicate this richness, and other people, they run away scared. You can see, or they're inventing reasons why it can't be like that. And it is so fascinating when you've sort of fallen in love, or it's like resonated deeply with this idea because it makes life richer.
Yeah.
And then you offer that fruit to somebody else and they go, "Ah!" Don't like it. And that comes back to that proselytizing. Anyway, I mentioned a concrete example from yesterday. I'm not sure if either of you have read, I think it's like GA 142 to 146. Steiner's talking about the Gospel of Mark, but he does it in relationship to the Bhagavad Gita and so like the underlying philosophy in there. And there is this beautiful translation of the Bhagavad Gita by a guy called Juan Mascaro, done in the beginning of the 20th century, 1920, something like that. And his translation of the Upanishads are beautiful. Anyway, so I wanted to read that because I'm reading it together with another friend. And I read the introduction by Juan Mascaro, the translator. And your heart is overflowing with the beautiful thoughts, the way he's able to weave in some ancient Greek themes and Shakespeare and Dante and all of these beautiful thoughts that present the human being as something so infinitely rich.
Mm.
And I read that first because I know I like Mascaro, but this is a modern edition, so they've got some professor, I can't even remember his name. You read 2 pages of that, they are talking about the same book, but it's like AI and robot speak.
Ugh.
It's so like technically it's accurate, but it's devoid of life.
Mm.
And that's sort of like just one real experience. How some people, obviously, this particular professor, it's like really thought he was writing something wonderful, but for me, it's an emotional wasteland that he's describing there. He's talking about one of the most amazing creations of literature, and yet I can feel a certain repulsion to that because of the way that he's described it. But fortunately, I can read something like Mascaro, and it's like, okay, my faith in humanity has been restored. So very simply, Steiner works for me, and I think for a lot of people, because when you begin to think with your heart about what's being communicated, then something starts moving in you. Yeah.
Yes. And you got anything for that, Brooke? I have.
Well, I mean, I want to ask the question, not having read either of those commentaries or translations of Bhagavad Gita. What do you think was the difference between the two people's perspective?
This is a huge generalization because there'll be exceptions to what I'm about to say, but academia premiums the use of the intellect, not getting too emotionally involved, trying to avoid certain words. So this was also a reflection I had whilst reading it. There was one part where there's this word dehin, which he could have used the word reincarnation to describe this process there, but he studiously avoided that. And it's a little bit like other people will studiously avoid using the word soul. So psychology, which is a study of the soul, but there is no soul in psychology. Or people, this is another true experience, people who are deeply into the philosophy of freedom and can't allow the word spirit to pass over their lips. In actual fact, they create a simplified version of the philosophy of spiritual activity, the philosophy of freedom, and basically they go through the text and they remove every mention of the word spirit and replace it with mental.
This is a thing? I'm sorry, that's a real thing? I've never.
I'm not going to give. I'll share the name offline.
Yeah,
I have mentioned it in conversation before, but yeah, that's a real thing. Yeah, that's a real thing.
That's so amusing.
There is a fear out there, and Steiner does talk about this fear that people have. So I would like to emphasize, I'm not criticizing that. Your question was, why does it
Yeah.
come about? And
Right.
I think some people are scared by the word spirit.
Yep.
But other people, it's like when they read Steiner talking about the soul and the spirit, instead of being scared and running away, they go, this is what
Yeah.
I've been looking for, even though I didn't know I was looking for it. I think that's part of
Amen.
the answer to your
Yeah.
question.
And let me go from that what you just said, Angus, because there's a part in this lecture, GA 234, lecture 1, that I'm using as a basis, where he says, this is a paraphrase with a little bit of quotation. Today, people harbor earnest questions which they can't even express in clear thoughts. I know that's my personal experience. And it's just like you say, where coming upon, I'm thinking of a part in your book series, Brooke. I think it's in Epiphany of Gold, the first one, where Epiphania's mother, the academic, uses soul and spirit as interchangeable.
Yeah. It's in this
Is
book.
it in that
It's
one?
in the second one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, then I never thought, I don't remember having the conscious thought like soul and spirit, aren't they different? But when I read Steiner, I'm like, yeah, right.
Right.
Right. I've always thought, like, when people say, oh, you're my soulmate, or you're, all this use of the word soul has always been puzzling to me. Like, what does that mean? Soulmate. Well, wait a minute now. Is the soul the part that is, eternal? Like, how can we be, I don't, I've never understood it. And then I read Steiner, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Soul over here, spirit. I mean, it's not the same thing.
Right. But it's
So,
interrelated. And that's what's so
sorry.
complicated. I mean, that's trying to understand the interrelation of soul and spirit, I think, is one of the most complicated and important aspects of Steiner's work. And we have to make sure that we're being clear to the other person we're speaking with that they also understand the terminology, because, of course, in colloquial language, in English, those mean the same thing.
Yeah, and we should do a podcast on difference. I would really love that.
Yeah.
But let me just continue just a little bit with connecting the other thing you said, Angus, a little bit back, which is that that Steiner says anthroposophy. This word anthroposophy is speaking about what's already in somebody's heart, which is what you said, Angus, in this beautiful way that you put it, and that Steiner puts it, and that if you learn to speak the language of the heart, you can hear that is what people are asking. And that's so beautiful to me, because I have a longing to get myself somewhere where I can kind of stop being caught up in how somebody puts something, and I can transcend for myself, like, oh, I think you're really asking this, like you're put it this way, which aggravates me, and I want to argue with you, but really, let me not do that. Let me go right to what I think you might be longing for. I really want that for myself.
That's a beautiful goal. Angus, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask the question back to you, Brooke. You asked the question, what do I think's behind so like this, the academic professor and the Reinmaskero. How would you have answered your own question about the cause of like this type of difference?
Well, I mean, especially after listening to you explain it, I agree. I think it is one person has a materialistic point of view, and they have rejected accepting soul and spirit as real, or as real as the materialistic point of view. And who knows why people do that? I mean, in various lectures, Steiner says something like, it's a tragedy or it's an illness. Can't remember which is which. Right. So actually, I think he says it's an illness when someone has become an atheist.
That's right. Yeah, he talks about it at 3 levels. It's stupidity, illness, or bad luck.
Yeah.
Steiny. Well, and it's always like, okay, what year was that in the very influential Catholic Church that the spirit was taken away from
Right.
your understanding of
869, yeah.
Yeah.
The date that's referred to.
that was whacking people in the knees. You know, it was kind of a crippling blow
Yeah.
to how you can think correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Take that away. Anyway, that's probably a side thing.
But that's right. You've got you say you like to be contrarian there. You could put your devil's hat on and say, well, why was that necessary?
Well, that's right. See, this is the quote. Let me see. Oh, you can't see what it says. The little what do you call that rectangle thing hanging there? Cordelia sent me a quote, and it's something like wisdom. Wisdom is in seeing the. Do you know what I'm?
No.
Gotta get up.
Go ahead and get it.
It's about. Let's see.
So my mom makes these little handwritten cards and gives them to us, and that's who made that. And there's Steiner quotes.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
That's who that is. Wisdom is born when I recognize the spiritual purpose in world phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of cool. So, yeah, I know. This whole thing, Angus. I know. Rhonda, just get with it and get rid of your attitude. All right. Let's move on.
That's not what I meant.
All right, so here we are. We've talked about like how is it that we're not proselytizing, right? When we want to be part of helping people find anthroposophy or know what's knowable.
Yeah.
So these two questions, do we want to talk about them that Steiner talks about in this lecture 1?
Well, I'd like to speak first to the not proselytizing because so for both of us, and maybe for all three of us, Angus, I don't know how long you've been making content online, but for me, it's very new. And for Rhonda, it's relatively new, especially when it comes to talking about spiritual matters or spirituality. The way I view it now is we have developed a basis in knowledge to a level where we can speak about it with some fluency. And it has provided a huge amount of, support and nutrition and health to us. And so the desire to share it online primarily, because I don't do this with in person unless people ask directly. Unless someone, walks up to my bookshelf and says, "What is all this?" I'm not going to talk about what I'm researching or what I'm reading. But online, someone can, either view or not view, or listen or not listen, or read or not read. Like it sort of respects the other individual's freedom of choice. If you don't like something, just turn it off. That's how I feel about now making content and sharing it. But in my personal life, I maintain that I'd say real strict rule, which is I would never bring it up first. Someone would have to ask.
Yeah, it gets to the heart also of the reason I would probably about 98% of my content on my channel is me in conversation with somebody or some people. And the key idea for me behind that is I find it deeply interesting when two people who know an area end up talking about that. It's rich. And if you can share that content, which is so easy nowadays online, then perhaps it might create a way in for a person that's trying to look for points. And I focus more on the philosophy side, but not uniquely, because that seems to be particularly difficult for people. I've spoken with many people who've talked about multiple attempts to engage with the philosophy of freedom and giving up or reading it but not getting the point. So that was where my process really started, because I was beginning to make some progress in my own way on that front and wanted to be find a way of communicating that out so that people would be encouraged to go back to something that they might have given up on at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I could say that for my part, like what I like to do on Practical Steiner is show people before their very ears how confused you can be in me, talking about me, not who I'm talking to, but still that it's, it's okay. It's okay to be confused in front of people and to have a question that seems totally ignorant. And like a child might ask it, like, I don't mind all that. I like that just because it's true. I mean, it's just like it's true that I have that question. And it's true that level that I'm confused at. So that's sort of like what I'm doing on Practical Steiner from my end. And it's about self edification, really. I mean, I do think that it's giving, it's offering anyway, whether people take it or not. I am making an offering. Why am I making a recording? Why don't I just have a conversation and then go home?
Right.
It is a kind of a offering to take the time to make it into a recording and put it somewhere where if people are looking, and they want to, and they find that inspiring and not like, why am I watching somebody bumble around? I don't want to do that. Totally fine. I was going to say too, something you both said again in the beginning of this lecture, to lecture 1 of 234. Steiner says that anyway, science based on initiation is that's what it's doing. Any science through the history that's based on initiation is this kind of thing which speaks to the heart, and he puts this part of it in the first place for those who wish to hear.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting, like you and your personal strict kind of code of conduct broke of, I'm not going to bring that up unless you do. It's sort of you're carrying on, right? This tradition of a kind of initiatory way of looking at.
And it also could just be that's my personality, which comes across, I think, as very private.
Yeah. But I think, my experience is that you are private. And I've always thought I don't know, I don't know you that long, 4, 5, 6 years. There's something else too. There's something else that's a guidepost for you that's very well in place. Maybe it's all privacy, but it's always seemed to me like a little bit like of wisdom of like, it's not, why would I talk on that level? Why would I do that? That's not helpful. I don't know. That's my own experience. Angus, anything?
I was thinking, I listened to both of your conversations. This is going back to what is it that living in people's heart question that I'm returning to. Both of you interviewed Pierce. What was his surname? I can't remember.
Oh, Kanuka.
Okay, Pierce Kanuka. And I really enjoyed listening to him. It's like rich experience, very different from my own experience of life, but it's all real experience. And he said this phrase, which has really stuck with me since he said it, is that those that don't have cosmology have a psychology. And I've been unpacking that like in multiple ways since I listened to you guys talking with him 2-3 weeks ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
And how it relates to this question for me is that what Steiner is presenting, what he's saying is the truth is that life is far richer and far more varied than we could possibly imagine from like this limited perspective. And I'm here to sort of like to show a picture. And what that does, I think one of the ways I've framed this is Steiner's giving you a cosmology. People who are just stuck with their own psychology, I am unsure whether it is possible to find any meaning for life if I just have my own psychology, because I am the only content of the world in a way. It's my soul, and that's it.
Right.
There is no meaning. There's just pure subjectivity, and whatever I say and think and do, that goes. But when you have a cosmology, what you're doing is you're putting that individual psyche, that individual soul, in a larger context, where all types of questions that are, I think, I haven't thought this through fully, but I think becomes like impossible to give an answer to if I've just got a psychology. I need a greater context in which to place myself as a human being. And I think anybody who's asking themselves meaning of life questions, so why am I suffering? Why is this happening to me? Or this person, what is the significance of them in my life? These type of questions that material science just can't answer. It just allows it. It's just chance. It's just chance. Or epiphenomenal activity. Anthroposophy gives us a means for beginning to approach that type of question and not give an answer. Yeah. I think that's important. It doesn't give the answer for your own specific circumstances, but it does say, it's like, this is the nature of life itself, a grander vision of life. Now, go back and ask yourself that same question, but given that greater context, and then some really interesting answers. And most importantly, I think for me, meaningfully possible answers begin to, it's like, okay, yeah. And it affects, it begins to affect the way we act in life in different situations. So it impacts on our ethical or moral life, where ethics and morals are just practical thinking. So how do I want to conduct my life? So yeah, psychology and cosmology are crucial in there for me.
Yeah, that quote, that when Pierce said it, that also really struck me. And I should say, he was very clear. It was a quote he got from someone else, and I'm not remembering who it was. It might have been Robert Sardello. It might have been Robert Powell. But it was very striking, that concept.
Yeah, and mentioning again this lecture one of the 234, Steiner saying the two questions: whence comes my human form? And then the secondary, basically, who am I? That could be put various different ways. But he says down here, it's on page 5 of, it was on page 5 of the one I downloaded. He says people repress this question, smother it. They don't bring it to clarity within themselves, but they still suffer from the question, or they deaden themselves, dope yourself this way or that from outer life. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. And if you do that, then you thus kill within you the secure feeling of your own being. So it's just like either or, it's emptiness of soul, like you said, Angus, emptiness of soul present in the subconscious of countless human beings today. And so it's like you said, it's you're empty, but you're only using knowledge about yourself, and that's leaving you empty, but you're not even know it. It's subconscious, and the longing to not be empty, is within us all as human beings.
Perhaps for the benefit of listeners, we should each try to restate the two questions that are posed in here.
I like it.
Which I also think Angus, correct me if I'm wrong. I think these are the two questions that are posed at the beginning of Philosophy of Freedom in different words.
Oh.
So I'll say, here's what I
go ahead. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
The two questions posed in this one lecture, which was, given in 1924, 40 years after the Philosophy of Freedom was published, or 30 years, 30 something. Anyway, the first one is, what is the relation of the human being to nature? Because when we humans really assess our relationship to nature, we realize that nature almost destroys us. Without our life, nature destroys us. And then the second big question is, why does my inner state not have the consistency that I see in outer existence? Why do my thoughts always come and go and disappear, and whereas outer existence remains consistent? And within those two big questions, there are these smaller questions. If we go back to the first question, what's the relation of human being to nature? Then we have, like, what is my true home? What is my true, what am I? And with the second question, what is it that sustains the stone but requires that my thoughts be constantly renewed? So that's how I understood the two questions.
Good ones.
Oh, that's it's so rich. That's so rich. Rather than restating the questions, I'd like to place some other dots there that all connect back to those two central questions. Last year, I read a book. This is GA20, The Riddle of Man. So it's the same essential question there. And that was the first time that I read. Perhaps I should put in a little parenthesis. We talked about why we do this. Obviously, study groups, study circles are such an enriching part of life. So when you read something together, either with just another person or within a group, you tend to make that extra, make that extra effort to read and inform yourself. And whilst you're reading this, you're like, these new questions are arising within you. Anyway, so The Riddle of Man, GA20. Steiner, so we're still basically in his philosophical writings here. And he really goes to town on the importance of Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel for answering this question. And when I did all three, it's like dug deeper, but this is the first time I already had like a fairly good basic knowledge of both Fichte and Hegel, but Schelling I hadn't delved into. So I really poured a lot of effort into there. And Schelling is beautiful for awakening this mystery of why anything exists at all in the first place, which is at the nub of this question that he's putting there. Why do we even exist? So what is it? Why did this? Isn't Schelling talking? There's like a more modern version of it. It's like, what on earth possessed the universe to create all the things that it's created? And if we it's like park to one side, it's like the purely materialistic chance-based solution to that, or non-solution to that problem. It's not a solution. It certainly doesn't add any meaning to the conversation. And we look at it through the eyes of Schelling, who's deeply influenced by, especially by the mystic Boehme, as was Hegel, and I believe also Fichte as well. What you experience when you're reading this is a deepening into this mystery of what am I as a human being, and the questions that he's asking here at the beginning. But of course, arriving at a completely different answer to that question, which ultimately, and this is Schelling, and you can see how Schelling was really critical in Steiner's own development. I'll add a little slight footnote in a second, but spirit wants to, let's say, incarnate, these are my words, so that it can know itself. Hegel is saying almost exactly the same thing in his own words. And the little footnote that I wanted to add there is that my understanding is that Steiner talks, I think it's in a letter or something he's writing to somebody. You might recognize this book. And he talks about being awake all night and working with a problem, and so having this breakthrough, where it's everything, so many things became clear. It's like in a moment. And in my mind, I don't know if this is factually correct. He was reading Schelling at the time, and his Weltäther, I think it's called. No, Weltalter, so Ages of the World, because it's working with this question of spirit wanting to incarnate so that it can know itself. And you can feel this beautiful tension being resolved of how I am both spirit, but that there is a reason for incarnation. So that's some of the dots that sort of like I started connecting was when you reiterated the question. GA20 is, if you got the time and the inclination, there's some really rich pickings there to be had.
So I've never read Fichte, Schelling, or Hegel, but recently I started reading one of Boehmer's books with a small study group here, but we've only gotten a few pages in. It is just like evolution of consciousness. It's so different. Like I it's hard for me to even understand how it became such a major influence on all of these thinkers, because it's just so different. And it seems to be going in circles and circles and circles and circles. Have you read it, Angus?
No, I haven't. I've read parts because there's a guy called Sigismund von Gleich who wrote a book on the 12 worldviews, which I wanted to translate into English. And I decided to add footnotes to, and it ended up being about 450 footnotes. And some of these quotes that he had in his book were from Burma, so I had to trace back, and I ended up reading, in this Fraktur Schrift is what, if anybody's seen what printing looked like, I think it's between about 1750 and 1850 in Germany. It's this. I have got examples, but I was reading this like this old German, and the images are so rich. But I haven't studied it, but I came into contact with it fairly recently, and you can feel, perhaps in Jungian psychology you talk about archetypal pictures. It's saturated with them. So when he starts talking about Adam's rib, for example, and he talks about it from so many different perspectives, and it's just, wow.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to put it, the archetype. Just how rich it is in picture. It's more like picture language than like, it's not like philosophy, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. No.
Yeah.
And this is the book that is written by Jacob Boehmer?
One of them is what I've only read a little bit. I'm forgetting the name of it, unfortunately.
That's what you've just now been talking about, not something written by Steiner. You're talking about something
written by Jacob Boehmer, yeah.
So what we're talking about is Steiner in, I believe it's GA11, talks about the immense importance of European mystics in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century for the development of science. And Burma particularly was important for. I'm getting one of these wrong because one of them was less impacted, but Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, at least two of those were strongly, and Schelling is definitely one of them, were strongly impacted by reading Burma. So there are ideas of the Urgrund, so like the primal beginnings or archetypal beginnings. This is a Burmean concept which basically Schelling adopts and so transforms into a philosophical language and argues it or presents it in a philosophically technical way, and not in like this picture language that Brooke was referring to.
Mm.
I mean, to turn what we're just talking about into kind of Steiner's language, it's like Burma is describing imaginations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how I would put those questions, but very simply, and I've definitely wondered, what am I doing here? It's basically where I would start with, who am I? Yes. What does it mean, soul? What's the difference between that and spirit? What the whole eternal thing? What is that talking about? All of it is questions that I've had that seem to me like what he's talking about here. When people have these deep, heartfelt things that they may not even be conscious of. I mean, and I love reading.
I've got a thought to add to bring it to perhaps a more easy to understand level. If we ask ourselves the chicken and the egg question, we feel our brains freeze. We are paralyzed. It's sort of like there's no way out.
Right.
With anthroposophy, you find a way out.
Yeah.
Well, so what is it then? It's the chicken or the egg, Angus?
This is where he's identical with Hegel and Schelling. Everything is in spirit that chooses to incarnate. And it's all in a process of evolution. But the one is the manifestation of the other. It's the same.
Yeah, and they're both those.
You have to change your frame of reference. You can't just work in the physical reality to resolve that problem. But what Steiner allows us to do, he gives us the technical language and the imagery to go along with it, and also the historical support to say these aren't just like plucked out of the air as well, although they do come from his own spiritual research. He's always saying, and by the way, what I'm saying here gained from my own research, if you look at this guy and that gal, they are saying similar things, but out of a different state of consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it would seem to me it's neither. It's like not the right question. That's the way I would say the chicken or the egg thing. It's just like you put it in a certain way where there's no way that we can talk about it, because those are two material things that aren't part of what's the answer to actually what is your question.
Right.
You need a different reference frame to be able to get a satisfactory answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I'm understanding this lecture, is like, what is the reference frame? And it happens to be that everyone is asking these questions, or nearly everyone. And so one of the things I was thinking as I was reading this is, how do I hear these questions formulated today, 100 years later, as I'm watching YouTube or listening to a podcast or something like that. And so the first question I hear, people are often saying, like, where am I from? I'm not from Earth. People say they're from the stars, or they say they're from, other planets, or they say, and so people have this sense, if they have a sense of kind of a spiritual existence, they have this sense that they're from somewhere else, and they don't know how to find out where. And then the second one, and this is much more practical, is like, what are thoughts? Because yeah, it's what are they?
Angus?
Oh, wow. You mentioned that you'd read like nearly the whole lecture series. I think it's in lecture 4. He starts talking about what thoughts are, the purpose of
I haven't.
meditation. You
I
haven't,
haven't
but
read it.
didn't you say you had, Rhonda?
I did.
But what I'm about to say, it won't be. I don't think it's going to be anything new for you. But what are thoughts? Well, if we're talking about the normal everyday thoughts that we have, they are dead abstractions. What is a real thought? It is something that's living and creative and imbued with a force to
Mm.
do stuff. So it's imbued with the forces of will. So how do people, how is that framed? So like, for example, in child growth is the idea that intellectual thinking doesn't really kick off until the life-filled thoughts have like completed their job of actually creating the human body. So if we see something made, our automatic question is, some type of creation is, it's like, who or what made that? And then if we ask ourselves the same question about ourselves, then one way of answering that question from an anthroposophical point of view is these were thoughts that were working in the etheric body to literally construct your body, to construct your own instrument with which you are going to live for the rest of your life. And it never stops supporting that process. Once it does, you die.
Right.
But it relinquishes a lot of its forces, which can then be used for abstract thinking, which is you could call them, let's call them like freeze frames of a living process that we like we capture as like an aspect of something alive in our thinking, but it's like a photo in comparison to a living plant or a living animal. It is just that. It's a snapshot. So where someone like Goethe is particularly important in anthroposophy, in the foundations of anthroposophy, is when he arrives at his image of the archetypal plant, it's by, I'm grossly simplifying, it's by collating a load of so like images through observation, but then it's like living with them so intensely that they actually regain their life and start to, it's like, demonstrate the living force which is within them. And this is like, the way I framed it is very similar to the way that Steiner describes what is the goal of meditation in chapter 4. We're trying to bring our thinking back to life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so I love what you said about, the human body being formed by living thoughts when the etheric is incarnating, I guess. And it's such a different way of thinking about what thoughts actually are than what we are, accustomed to. When Daniel and I participated in that early COVID study group where we just read the philosophical works in order that they were written, one of the things that we both took so strongly from, I think it was Philosophy of Freedom, is the brain is a sense organ for thoughts. And that, when you just suddenly start looking at it like that, then you see that the thoughts are, the living thoughts are outside of you in this metaphorical sense.
Yeah.
And your brain is able to sense them, which is why we can learn about the world. Our brain can extract the wisdom of the world by observing it and through this kind of Goethean phenomenology approach. But our brain is not able to, in the case of average people, make living thoughts. And yet, if we start to, if we look at where this I don't know, idea leads, it implies that there is a way to be able to make living thoughts again, which I suppose, that's in some way it could be the creative word, the word. And in the future, that is a developmental stage that the human being, long future finds.
I mean, is this somehow related to the create your own reality
I think that is,
thing?
yeah. So I think that is like let's say an intuition or a semi-true intuition that modern people have, where this is probably not yet true for the vast majority of people, but it is a potentiality. So like seeing the Urpflanze, that is the archetypal possibility of a plant. And we humans have our archetypal possibilities as well.
That would be a whole podcast, in my opinion, for me, because this is so interesting to me, this difference in between a whatever one would call it, one might say a new agey way of understanding, create your own reality, and what Steiner,
Right.
what's the understanding of that? Because as usual, I have not enjoyed the new agey language for it. I don't understand what you mean, and I am even slightly offended
Yeah.
at the suggestion, because I want to know, what are we talking about here? And I, at the same time, think I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true, but help me out here. Like,
Right.
help me out here to understand, what does this mean, that that's a possibility for us, and like how to go from there. I don't think it's the right thing to then make a bunch of posters around my room that say you're good enough and think positively and all of
Right.
those things, which are like, they're fine, they're fine, they're people longing for something, but I really want to know what Steiner gives us in this question. So let's keep that on the back burner.
Can I just jump in there? Because when you asked me to introduce myself at the beginning, and I gave a very, very brief story, one aspect of the story that I didn't add was, and it's related to New Age, is prior to meeting Steiner, I spent, I would say, around about a year and a half consuming. I was like 22 to 24 years old. I was consuming like anything I could from like New Age literature. And I was, after about 1.5, 2 years, I was becoming so like going, yeah, this is interesting, but what's real? That was the question. So I was beginning to become satiated with it. I'd felt the joy and sort of the liberation of different ways of seeing the world, but I was still looking for something that would sort of like help me to discern, which of this is woo-woo and which of this has actually got some substance. There's a, go back to the like earlier part, which is a true cosmology, which is based on a true like vision of the world. And I'd already like left that behind me, but one of the residues of reading New Age literature, and other people might recognize this, is you come across the idea of Atlantis, and you sort of say, interesting idea. Yeah, you could talk about Plato and like the others, like different pieces of evidence that there was some type of civilization. Anyway, I mentioned this to a friend who was studying eurythmy. I had no idea. It was actually the cousin of my wife, now wife. I mentioned it to her that I was interested in that. She said, "Oh, you should go away and read Steiner." Okay, first time I think I'd heard the name Steiner in my life. I returned to England. I was in Sweden at the time, and read the Philosophy of Freedom. And I nearly parked the whole Steiner project, but I ended up going and studying in Finland for 6 months. And again, another long story, but I end up in a library that has absolutely everything. So the whole Gesamtausgabe, the whole collective works in German. And a professor has told me to go and find out what he has to say about the Finnish national epic called the Kalevala. And it was after 4 months of practically living in that library that I sensed long way from really experiencing, I sensed this is what was missing when I was reading all this New Age literature.
Okay, and what is this that was missing?
The cosmology.
The cosmology.
As a picture in which what is being said here actually makes sense. It is reasonable to say that this happened. Perhaps if I give an example. So a simplistic ethnology will say everybody had religions like back thousands of years ago because they're all stupid. Okay, that's one explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Steiner will say religion. So I don't doubt that this mobile phone is here in my hand because I can see it. And 3, 4, 5, the further you go back in time, people were clairvoyant. They saw spiritual beings. Religion isn't some fiction. It's a reporting of experiences. And that is a far more meaningful interpretation of humanity's history when you begin to understand people weren't stupid. They were seeing things that most of us no longer see. But armed with that new cosmology, you begin to see, oh, well, there are one or two stragglers in the world now, and there are one or two outliers in research that actually seem to confirm what Steiner is saying.
Yeah.
So answers to questions that denigrated the whole of humanity up to today. Mm-hmm. Instead, they take on a completely different aspect.
Yeah,
and that's what Stein has allowed me to connect with, and the experience of history being a meaningful process. And this isn't just history. Remember, we are all players. We are all on the stage of history, and according to Steiner, multiple times. So the whole picture becomes richer of what is life itself.
I would say that's a pretty good way to wrap up. Just to relate what you were saying, Angus, back to this lecture, because I'd like to do that in Practical Steiner. At the end of that lecture one, he talks about these things that you just said, like there was knowledge in ancient times, but it's not valid anymore. And this is a point that I've loved to understand articulation for, because personally speaking, and I know I share this with a lot of people, having looked in younger years for something in religion and not finding it, then turning to the East, which is a general way for me to say turning to ancient or times and thinking there's an answer there, and it's been really great for me to go, oh yeah, yes, there was answers, but that's not where to look. That's not where to look anymore, Rhonda. So he talks about that, and then that people turn to art, but people aren't Raphael anymore. They don't have the wherewithal to capture what he could capture. We can't do that either. And religion doesn't have any answer, so that there's no answers anywhere for us. And this just circles back around to the first part of this, what we were talking about, which is we have these questions but there's no answers.
Right.
And he says in the very end, people ask out of a mood of soul, which I love that phrase. And anthroposophy has to answer that. Where can I find knowledge of the world which meets my needs?
Yeah.
And just at the very end to say that he says anthroposophy has answers for modern consciousness, receiving its mighty task from the voice of the human heart itself.
That's very nice. And the other question I had written down is again, viewing anthroposophy as this being, anthroposophia, where is it now?
You want to wrap it up, Angus, with an answer to that one?
Yeah. GA18, last chapter.
Okay. That's where she is.
Riddles of philosophy. But perhaps that could be the starting point, the starting question for our next conversation. What is the being of anthroposophy? When does Steiner talk about it, and how is it related back to this question? Because I really like the connection you made there, Brooke.
Okay. Do we need to read GA18 in order to have this conversation? Or should we talk about abstract thinking next?
I think let's have a chat offline about what we think we want to do there. But I'm certainly not saying we have to. I was asked, have you got an answer to that question? Yes, I do. Or a potential answer but that's a starting point for a whole conversation. That's the way I'd like to be interpreted.
Okay.
Love it. It's fabulous.
Yeah, and for my part, just to say that I'm very interested, as I am with anything Steiner, in this way of putting anthroposophia is a being. This is a way. You all might talk amongst yourselves for a podcast, I guess, is the bottom line of what I'm trying to say, if you talk about that, because I don't have hardly anything to say about anthroposophia as a being. Maybe I could read GA18, but it's such a new way of thinking for me. This whole talking about things like as beings, I love it. There's something I really love about that language. And it reaches deep in me, but I have hardly any way to talk about it personally yet.
Can I ask a quick question there, Ronda? But but the idea of Michael, that's not strange to you, is it?
It's not strange, right? Like Rhonda, that's a being. Wow. You're saying? Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's totally fine. I guess I'm just saying that maybe it would be richer if you two talked about something that you both have some good language for, and I could tune in and listen, and then we could have a practical Steiner where I would say, "Hey, I've got 5 questions for y'all."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of planning a conversation about angelic hierarchies if we're doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As usual, you're
highly practical.
All right, well let's we better wrap this up. So thank you very much, Angus and Brooke, for being willing to talk about these things for the Practical Steiner podcast. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm going to love listening back to this.
Likewise. Thank you, Rhonda, for doing this. Thank you, Angus.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.